Jai Hind and welcome back. In our previous session, we explored the Rajput and Mughal strategic traditions, two contrasting approaches to the warfare that dominated medieval India for centuries. Today, in part 2, we are going to examine something quite different and in many ways revolutionary. The Maratha strategic tradition pioneered by Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj. What makes the Maratha tradition particularly fascinating is that it emerged as a response to Mughal dominance. The Marathas did not have the resources, the artillery, or the numeric strength of the Mughal Empire. Yet, they not only survived but eventually built an empire that dominated much of India by the 18th century. How did they do it? Through strategic innovation, tactical creativity, and a fundamental rethinking of how warfare should be conducted. We will also engage in comparative analysis today, examining how these three traditions, Rajput, Mughal, and Maratha, approached a fundamental question of military strategy differently, and what enduring lesson we can extract for contemporary strategic thinking. Moving forward, we are going to discuss the Maratha strategic tradition. Basically, let's begin with the Marathas, whose strategic tradition crystallized in the 17th-18th century under the brilliant leadership of Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj. Born in 1630, Shivaji faced an enormous challenge, creating an independent Maratha kingdom in a region dominated by powerful sultans and the expanding Mughal Empire. Shivaji could not match the Mughals in pitched battles. They had superior numbers, better artillery, and more resources. So he revolutionized warfare through what he called Ganimikawa, guerrilla warfare. This was not just tactical innovation, it was a complete strategic philosophy based on mobility, surprise, and terrain exploitation. The Maratha strategic tradition rested on several pillars. First, guerrilla warfare as the primary tactical doctrine, avoiding conventional battle and instead using hit and run tactics. Second, naval power and coastal defense innovations, something often overlooked in discussions of Indian military history. Third, decentralized command with autonomous military units, very different from the Mughal centralized model. And finally, strategic mobility and terrain exploitation, particularly of the Western Ghats mountain range. What remarkable is that Shivaji did not just create a resistance movement, he built a state institution that could sustain military operations, collect revenue, administratory, and maintain diplomatic relations. This was guerrilla warfare elevated to the level of state building. So, what is Ganimikawa? Let's dive deep into Ganimikawa, the guerrilla warfare doctrine that made the Marathas so formidable. The term itself is evocative. Ganimikawa can be translated as enemy harassing or guerrilla tactics, and it represented a comprehensive approach to warfare when facing a superior enemy. The core principle was hit and run tactics, swift attacks followed by rapid withdrawals. Maratha forces would strike at Mughal supply convoys, isolated garrisons, or vulnerable columns, then disappear before the enemy could organize a response. They did not try to hold ground against superior forces. They sought to exhaust and demoralize the enemy through constant harassment. Terrain advantage was crucial. The Western Ghats, the Sahyadri Mountains range provided incredibly difficult terrain for conventional armies, but was ideal for guerrilla operations. Maratha forces knew every path, every valley, every hiding spots. They could move rapidly through terrain where Mughal cavalry and artillery struggled to operate. The mountains were their ally. Surprise attacks, particularly night raids and ambushes, were central to Maratha's tactics. While conventional armies typically fought during daylight hours, following established protocols, Marathas would attack at night in bad weathers from unexpected directions. They violated the rules of warfare because those rules favored their stronger enemies. The fundamental strategic principle was avoiding pitched battle against numerically superior forces. Why fight on your enemy's terms? Shivaji understood that one major defeat could destroy his kingdom. So he never risked everything in a single conventional battle unless absolutely necessary. This required discipline and strategic patience. So there was also Maratha fortification network. The Marathas also built an impressive network of hill forts across the Western Ghats. You might think, wait, did not we just say that they avoided holding fixed position? This requires explanation because Maratha forts served a different purpose than Rajput forts. The Maratha forts network across the Shahdri range was not primarily about passive defense. It was about offensive operations and territorial control. Though these forts served as bases from which raids could be launched as refugees were forced could resupply and rest. Where, refuge were forced could resupply and rest, and as symbol of Maratha sovereignty over the region. The strategic positioning of these forts was brilliant. They controlled key mountains passes, protected important resources, and could support each other. If one fort was threatened, other could send relief force. This created a defensive depth that made it nearly impossible for enemies to secure the region. What's particularly impressive is the rapid communication system between forts. They use signal fires on mountain tops to send messages quickly across vast distances. The early warning system meant that Maratha force could concentrate rapidly against threat or disperse when necessary. Examples include Raigad, Shivaji's capital, a fort so secure that he could govern from it even while the Mughals army controlled the plains below. Pratapgarh, where Shivaji defeated Afzal Khan in 1659 through combination of diplomacy and tactical surprise, Sinhagad in captured in a daring night raid in 1670. Each fort has its own dramatic history. Here is something that surprised many students. Shivaji Maharaj is sometimes called the father of the Indian Navy because he recognized something that most Indian rulers had neglected, the strategic importance of naval power. India has thousands of kilometers of coastline, and during Shivaji's time, European powers, particularly the Portuguese and later the British, controlled much of the maritime trade. Indian rulers generally focused on land warfare, conceding the seas to Europeans almost by default. Shivaji rejected this. He established a Maratha navy focused on what we now call green water operations, coastal and shallow water naval warfare. His ships were not designed to fight European warships in deep ocean battles. They were designed for coastal defense, intercepting trade vessels and amphibious operation. Maratha naval tactics emphasized speed and boarding actions. They could use swift galleys to approach enemy merchant ships, board them, and engage in hand-to-hand combat, essentially applying their guerrilla warfare philosophy to naval operations. They disrupted Portuguese and British maritime trade, forcing European power to negotiate with the Maratha kingdom as equals. These naval dimensions give the Marathas strategic options unavailable to landlocked powers. They could conduct amphibious raids, control coastal trades, and protect their coastline from naval invasions. It was a complete strategic vision combining land and sea power. So, what was the Maratha military structure? Let's examine how Maratha military force were actually structured, because this reveals much about their strategic philosophy. The Maratha military emphasized mobility, flexibility, and intelligence, quite different from either the Rajput feudal levy or the Mughal centralized standing army. Light cavalry formed the core of Maratha military power. These were highly mobile mountain forces called brigades. Professional cavalry which could cover vast distance rapidly. Unlike the heavy Rajput cavalry with their armor and traditional weapons, Maratha cavalry traveled light, prioritizing speed and endurance over the shock impact. They could march 60-70 km in a day when necessary. When necessary, infantry came primarily from the hill regions. The Mavli, though found in Mavli, mountains people who provided excellent food soldiers. They were particularly effective in a difficult terrain of the Western Ghats and in siege operations against forts. The Marathas' intelligence network was extraordinarily sophisticated. Shivaji established an extensive spy system with the legendary Bahraji's Nayak serving as his intelligence chief. Maratha agents operated throughout the Mughal Empire, providing information about troops movement, political development, and strategic vulnerabilities. This intelligence allowed Marathas to strike when enemies were weak and avoid engagements when enemies were strong. The command structure was deliberately decentralized. Shivaji appointed regional commanders called Subedars and Sardars who had significant autonomy in their areas. This centralization meant that Maratha force could operate in multiple theatres simultaneously and could continue functioning even if one force was defeated or one commander captured. So what was Maratha's expansion strategy? Now let's trace the evolution of Maratha strategy from guerrilla resistance to imperial expansion. This transformation reveals both the strength and eventual limitation of the Maratha system. Initially, under Shivaji's, the strategy was primarily defensive, carving out and securing a Maratha homeland, Swaraj, in the Western Ghats and Konkan coast. Guerrilla warfare was perfect for his phase, harassing Mughals armies, avoiding major battles, gradually expanding territory. However, as Maratha power grew, particularly under the Peshwas in 18th century, the strategy became increasingly offensive and expansionist. The Marathas began thinking in terms of empire building rather than just defensive independence. This required adopting their tactics. They developed innovative revenue collector system, Chauth and Sardeshmukhi. Chauth was essentially protection money, one quarter of revenue extracted from territories the Marathas raided. Sardeshmukhi was an additional 10% claimed as hereditary right. This turned military power directly into economic resources, funding further expansion. As they expanded beyond their mountainous homeland into the plains of northern India, Maratha had to adapt from purely defensive guerrilla operations to offensive conventional warfare. They began maintaining larger armies, using artillery more extensively, and fighting pitched battles. This transformation brought both successes and challenges. The challenges was dramatically illustrated at the Third Battle of Panipat in 1761, where a massive Maratha army was destroyed by Ahmad Shah Abdali. The Maratha, fighting far from their homeland in a conventional battle against superior cavalry and artillery, suffered catastrophic defeat. This exposed the limitation of applying guerrilla-based strategy to imperial expansion. So now let's step back and compare these three traditions systematically. What emerges is a fascinating picture of how culture, geography, technology, and political structure interact to shape strategic approaches. The Rajputs were fundamentally honor based. Their strategy and tactics were shaped by chivalric code that prioritized personal valor and honor over tactical flexibility. They were cavalry dominated, relying on the shock power of mountain warriors. The defensive forts were symbols of power and prestige as much as military necessities. The Rajputs approach was the Rajput approach was traditionalist and conservative. The Mughals represented technological sophistication and administrative centralization. Their strategic approach was built on gunpowder weapons, artillery, and muskets that revolutionized warfare. They maintained centralized imperial bureaucracy that could deploy professional forces anywhere in their vast empire. Crucially, they combined military power with diplomatic flexibility, using marriage, alliances, religious tolerance, and administrative incorporation to consolidate their rule. The Maratha emphasized mobility, guerrilla tactics, and naval power. Their approaches was fundamentally asymmetric, designed to negate the advantages of stronger conventional forces. They operated with decentralized command structure that gave regional commanders autonomy. They innovated in both land and sea warfare, creating India's first significant indigenous navy in centuries. Think about what this tells us. There is no single correct way to conduct warfare. Each tradition reflected its society's values, geographic position, technological capabilities, and political structure. Strategic effectiveness depends on matching your approach to your circumstances. Moving forward, let's now examine how these three traditions approached technological change, because this reveals crucial insights about strategic adaptation. The Rajputs were slow to adopt gunpowder technology. They maintained their traditional focus on cavalry warfare and personal combat even as gunpowder weapons were transforming warfare globally. This was not merely ignorance, it was cultural resistance. Firearms were seen as less honorable than traditional weapons. Standing back with a musket was not as glorious as charge with a sword. This conservatism eventually became a strategic liability. The Mughals, by contrast, were early and enthusiastic adopters. They brought gunpowder technology to India on an unprecedented scale and integrated it systematically into their military doctrine. They did not just buy guns. They established weapons foundries, trained specialized artillery corps, and developed tactics specifically for combined arms warfare. Their technological openness revolutionized Indian warfare. The Marathas showed selective adaptation. They adopted firearms and even artillery while maintaining their emphasis on mobility and guerrilla tactics. They did not try to outgun the Mughals in conventional warfare. Instead, they integrated new weapons into their existing strategic framework. This balanced approach, adopting useful innovations while maintaining your strategic identity, proved highly effective. The lessons: technological adaptation reflects strategic flexibility and innovation capacity. Societies that can integrate new technologies while maintaining strategic coherence have advantages. Those who resist innovation for cultural reasons eventually pay strategic cost. But blind adaptation without strategic integration is equally problematic. Let's examine command and organizational structure, because these reveals underlying political philosophy and strategic priorities. The Rajput system was feudal and clan based, built on personal loyalty. A Rajput warrior's oath was to his immediate lord, creating vertical bonds of loyalty that were extraordinarily strong but horizontally fragmented. Different clans had difficulty coordinating because they had no common command structure beyond personal relationship between chieftains, and created tactical cohesion within units but strategic fragmentation across the army. The Mughal system was centralized imperial bureaucracy operating through the Mansabdari system. Every military commander held a precise rank, Mansab, that determined their pay, status, and the numbers of troops they maintained. This created a professional military class with clear hierarchy, standardized organization, and the ability to coordinate large complex operations. The emperor could deploy forces anywhere because command authority followed from the center. The Maratha system emphasized decentralized regional autonomy. Regional commanders had significant independence in decision making, allowing rapid response to local conditions without waiting for central approval. This created operational flexibility and resilience. The death or defeat of one commander did not paralyze the entire system. However, it sometimes led to a coordination problem during large scale operations. Each system reflected its underlying political philosophy. Rajput organization mirrored their clan based social structure. Mughal organization reflected their administrative empire building approach. Maratha organization suited their guerrilla warfare strategy and rapid territorial expansion. So, your organizational structure should support your strategic approaches. These are the lessons. Structure is not neutral, it enables central strategies while contrasting others. As we conclude, let's extract enduring strategic lessons from these medieval traditions that remain relevant today. This is where historical study became practically valuable for contemporary strategic thinking. First, terrain exploitation and fortification remain strategically relevant, whether it's the Rajput hill forts, Mughal siege techniques, or Maratha mountains warfare. The fundamental principle endures: use geography as a strategic multiplier. Modern militaries still study terrain analysis, defensive position, and how geographic shapes operation possibility. Second, technological adaptation determine military superiority. The Mughal embrace of gunpowder versus Rajput resistance illustrate a timeless truth. Military effectiveness require continuous technological evolution. Today, we can see this in cyber warfare, drones, and in artificial intelligence. Societies that innovate maintain advantages, those who resist fall behind. Third, guerrilla tactics remain viable against superior conventional force. Shivaji's Ganimikawa demonstrated that mobility, surprise, and asymmetric operations can utilize advantages in numbers and firepowers. This lesson has been relearned repeatedly in Vietnam, Afghanistan, and elsewhere. Conventional superiority does not guarantee victory against determined guerrilla resistance. Fourth, diplomacy and military power must work in tandem. Akbar's strategic diplomacy showed that conquest alone does not create lasting dominance. You need political integration, cultural accommodation, and giving former enemies stakes in the new order. Modern counterinsurgency doctrine echoes this. Military operation must enable political solution. Additionally, we can observe that cultural values shapes strategic behavior, sometimes as strength, sometimes as limitations. Honor-bound warriors code create fierce resistance, but strategic inflexibility, understanding how culture shapes military behavior, remain crucial in contemporary strategic analysis. Finally, organizational structure must match strategic requirements. Centralized command enables coordinated conventional operations. Decentralized structure suits guerrilla warfare and rapid territorial expansion. Uh, there is no universally optimal structure, only structures appropriate to specific strategic context. So let me tie these threads together. What we have studied is not merely a historical curiosity, it's a lab for understanding strategic principles that transcend specific times and places. The Rajputs teach us how the power and limitation of cultural values in warfare, the importance of fortification, how honor can be both strength and the vulnerability. The Mughal demonstrate how technological innovation, administrative sophistication, and diplomatic flexibility can build empires. The Maratha show how strategically creative asymmetric warfare and political resilience can overcome material disadvantages. For students of defense and strategic studies, these case studies provide framework for the analyzing contemporary situation. When you study insurgencies, consider Maratha guerrilla doctrines. When you analyze military modernization programs, think about Mughal technological adoption versus Rajput resistance. When you examine alliance system and political integration, recall Akbar's strategic diplomacy. Medieval Indian strategic tradition are not primitive uh, precursors to real modern warfare. They have sophisticated strategic system that grappled with uh, perennial perennial questions. How do you fight when outnumbered? How do you integrate new technologies? How do you balance honor with effectiveness? How do you turn military power into political legitimacy? These questions remain relevant today. As we close, I would like you to reflect on several questions that will deepen your understanding. First, if you were advising a small nation facing a larger, more technologically advanced adversary today, what lessons from Maratha strategy might be applicable? What would not work in contemporary context? Second, the Rajput honor code created both military strength and weaknesses. Can you identify modern militaries or strategic culture where similar value system create both advantages and limitations? Third, the Mughals succeeded through combined arms integration, technological adaptation, and diplomatic flexibility. Which contemporary power followed a similar model? What are the challenges of sustaining such an approach? Finally, all three traditions eventually declined or were absorbed by newer powers. What does this tell us about the life cycle of a strategic system? Can any strategic doctrine remain effective indefinitely, or must all eventually adapt or perish? Let me conclude with a broader reflection. Strategy is not abstract mathematics or pure technology. It's fundamentally a human endeavor shaped by culture, values, geography, politics, and historical experience. The Rajputs, Mughals, and Marathas developed their distinct strategic traditions because they were different people facing different challenges in different contexts. Understanding medieval Indian strategic tradition enrich our analytical toolkit as defense and strategic studies professionals. It reminds us that military effectiveness is culturally embedded, that technological change create strategic opportunities and threats, that geography matters profoundly, and that there are multiple paths to strategic success depending on circumstances. These warriors, Rajput, Sufistan, defending their ancestral forts, Mughal emperor building vast empires, Maratha guerrillas harassing superior enemies, were our strategic ancestors. They face eternal question of warfare and power with creativity, courage, and systematic thinking. By studying their successes and failure, we become better equipped to face our own strategic challenges. Thank you for your engagement throughout this session, and I would like to see you in next lecture discussing the next topic on Gandhi, Nehru, and Tilak. Thank you.